Raise your hand if you got a question with a paper so I can come pick it up.
It says, how can we listen to sermons from me? What's the name of his church? You can go to Truth Triumphant Ministries YouTube. And we have over 2,000 sermons on our YouTube channel, Truth Triumphant Ministries YouTube, on all kinds of subjects. What do you think about a no-cash society? Well, no-cash society would set the stage for Revelation chapter 13, when the government in America would be able to dictate who will buy and who will sell. That's where digital currency is heading. It's pretty simple. How bad will it be? Well, if I go to the store and I want to buy something, I won't be able to. So I'm going to have an alternative way to take care of myself and my family. What must we do to be sealed in the final day? Well, Ellen White says that in order to be sealed, we need to be settled into the truth, both spiritually and intellectually. So we need to know what we believe, but we also need to be in surrender to it. So, and then of course in Revelation chapter 14, when it talks about the sealing, Revelation 14, it says, these are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These are they which follow the Lamb, whithersoever he goeth. These were redeemed from among men, being the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb. So wherever the Lord leads, whatever his counsel is to us, we need to follow it. And that's a prerequisite to being sealed. So it says, is your message about the Seventh-day Adventist Church to avoid tithes and offerings to that church, or to avoid tithes and offerings totally? In other words, we don't give tithe or offerings, I guess, ever. I firmly believe that to support the denomination or to encourage people to support the denomination, as many present truth speakers do, makes no sense at all. How do I support apostasy? How do I support Wilson, Kohler, and Douglas working with the UN? How do I do that? I can't. Should we pay tithes and offerings? Absolutely we should. That's a biblical principle. And, I remember hearing a man I used to work for by the name of John Osborne. He said, the gospel is free, but to communicate it to the world costs money. And so we can use it to further the truth of God in the earth. Let's see here. What happened between you and Andy Roman? I made some comments, as I sometimes do, and last Sabbath I made some comments about Andy Roman. In my sermon in my church in Florida. I have known Andy for a long, long time. I've looked at him like he was a little brother of mine. And some people would say that, you know, what I said about him last Sabbath was hateful, or, well, Andy called it insane. But in spite of public opinion, I still do love him. And what I said to him in the sermon last Sabbath was with that motive. Now, some people would say, well, Bill, you were hateful, or you were ugly, or you were this, or you were that. Folk, as we noticed, as I've experienced for the last nearly 50 years in Seventh-day Adventism, Seventh-day Adventism is built on two principles. You don't disobey your leaders. You do exactly what they tell you, and you support them in it. And if you don't, then they'll do everything they can to ruin you. Well, before the comments I made last Sabbath about Andy, I was at meetings with Andy about 2 years ago in which we were in a Q&A, and this was in Alabama. There were about 6 of us on the panel, and people were asking questions from the audience. And finally, a gentleman raised his hand and said, we're talking about the apostasy in the church. I mean, that's what all the questions centered around. And so one person raised their hand and said, what should we do about it? Well, the panel, there were 6 of us. The first 3 of the guys to my right, they said, you know, basically, we got to pray for them. And quite honestly, folk, when you're hell-bent on the path the denomination's in today, you can pray till you're blue in the face, and it's not going to help one bit. Because when Ellen White said nothing would be allowed to stand in the way of this new movement, that includes God. God can't even stop the apostasy in Adventism today. He can't. Yeah. What's that? That's right. That's right. So, very frankly, folk, I don't know how to say anything any differently, but I was getting very bothered by the panel's answers. They kept saying, you know, we got to keep them in prayer. They're our brethren. And I'm going, that's a bunch of baloney. They're not our brethren. And I'm not going to pray that God will change them, because he can't, because they don't want to be changed. So finally I raised my hand and I said, I'd like the mic. And I said, folk, there's 2 things you do with the apostasy in Adventism. Number 1 is you protest. You get right in the face of your pastor or your elders, and you do it very kindly, but you let them know exactly how you feel about them teaching you that you can be saved in your sins. And you tell them exactly how you feel about them poo-pooing Ellen White, or poo-pooing the investigative judgment. You let them know. And you don't like the fact that the pastor never quotes from Ellen White or encourages the ecumenical movement. You let them know that. And what happens is you become the bad guy. Immediately, you're the bad guy. And so the pastor will start to have his eye on you as, oh, that person's divisive and critical and ugly. Well then, folk, when the pastor doesn't change, because he's not going to, then you go up to him and you say, you know what? Until you start preaching the truth, I'm not going to give you another dime in that till. Amen. I said, that's what you do. You protest with your voice and you protest with your wallet. 3 of the men to my right, they looked at me right there on the panel and they said, you're a troublemaker. And they folk were present truth. Okay, they're present truth. Well, the person on my left was Andy Roman. And Andy said, Andy got the mic. And Andy, now I'm paraphrasing, okay? This happened over 2 years ago, so I'm paraphrasing some of it here. But Andy basically said, oh no, we can't stop supporting the conference. You know, there's a lot of faithful men in there, and we've got to keep supporting them. And I'm up there on the panel, and I'm going, you know, I wasn't going to disagree with him right there. I didn't want to embarrass him, but I couldn't believe what I was hearing. So after the meeting, we got on the road, and Andy and his wife were driving me back to where we were staying. And I started asking Andy questions. I said, Andy, you know, how could you give that answer? That wasn't correct. We should not be supporting apostasy. Well, Andy defended his position. And I said, Andy, are you involved with the conference in some way? And he said, well, yeah, I work for, I'm a leader in a church in Oklahoma. And I go around and speak in all the conference churches in Oklahoma. I'm going, really? And I told him, I said, Andy, you better watch it, because I know the game they play. They'll suck you in. They'll start making demands that you preach a certain way. And eventually and ultimately, you've got to sacrifice your conscience. I said, I lived it, Andy. His response was, he said, oh, brother, you know, don't worry about me. I've got it well in control. And I thought in my mind, because I realized at that moment that there wasn't anything I was saying that was getting through. That bothered me. That concerned me. So, about a year ago, I had another run-in with Andy. And again, it was over his newspaper. Andy sends out a very thoughtful paper where he talks about apostasy in the church, and he talks about what the leaders are doing to bring about a Sunday law. It's very good material. But I began to notice in his periodical that Andy never calls the people to action. He never calls his readers to action. He never says, you've got to call out what's going on, you've got to protest it, and then you've got to withdraw your funds. He never says anything about protesting. And so I called him on it, and I emailed him, and I said, Andy, your articles are good, but you never have a call to action. And I said, Andy, what are we supposed to do? We can't support that with our time, our presence, and our money, Because if we do, we're saying we agree with them. And we don't, I don't think. He wrote back and he said, this has been my position for the last 25 years, and I'm not going to change. So he recently was at the General Conference in St. Louis, and he did an interview with a young man by the name of Jeremy Serrato, and the impression that was left on my mind as I listened to their interview was that it would be good for people to become a part of a conference church and begin to try to work their way up in the conference church so they can make change. And Andy mentioned, he used the word privilege, what a privilege it was, because he had interviewed or asked some questions at the meetings there. Now, am I saying it exactly the way he said it? No, but I'm getting the gist. You can go back and watch the video. Go back and watch what he said. So I thought to myself through last week, I thought, you know, and when I watched that, I don't know how many of you watch Advent Media Connect. Have any of you seen that? Yeah. Okay, some of you watched that. Advent Media Connect had a clip, had a thing on it about me and about what I said about Andy Roman and how I was totally out of line. And they kept repeating the fact that in my talk last Sabbath that I said, when I heard the talk that Andy and this gentleman did, it made me want to vomit. And Advent Media Connect repeated it 3 times. They said, makes me want to vomit, makes me want to vomit. And I'm going, what is their point here? You know, if they had taken from the very beginning of my comments and gone right through, folk, when I heard Andy talking with that gentleman about St. Louis, I wasn't kidding. I did feel like vomiting. I did feel sick. I was so upset that I had something that I needed to take into where I do my mailing, and I had put it in my office that morning. I was so upset with what I'd heard Andy and this young man talking about, I forgot it and went on to the post office. And I don't do things like that. My life is very regimented. I've got a very, you know, da-da-da-da-da-da-da kind of schedule. So I was very upset. But again, I felt that Advent Media Connects, the way they did it and the way they brought on that other speaker, Lemon, and Lemon saying, well, he should have used Matthew 18. I'm going to try to say this real well. Matthew chapter 18 applies only if I'm walking to go get a drink of water and Hugo, you trip me. Now we have an issue because Hugo tripped me and my nose is bleeding. That's when I go to Hugo and I say, Hugo, I didn't like you tripping me and my nose is bleeding now. It's for personal issues. I don't have anything against you, Hugo. What Andy's done, that's not personal. These are core issues that I've tried to deal with him on 2 other occasions. It's not a personal thing. I'm very concerned about him and his desire to be in the conference. I'm frightened about that. So after I made those comments last Sabbath, I've gotten several angry emails from Andy Roman. And then I think Andy, well, I don't think, I know he put out a rather vicious tirade against me from what other people have told me, because I haven't watched it. I'm not concerned about it, to be honest with you. I cared about Andy. I made a public statement because he didn't hear me when I tried to do it in private. So I did it because I don't want to see him get hurt by the denomination, as they have hurt so many other people. So he got mad, and he put out a video on his YouTube channel, and he put out a tirade on his Advent Messenger magazine or email thing that he sends out, in which he, I guess, said some very unkind things, or I guess what he would say was very truthful things about me. So did I handle it the right way? You know, a lot of people, not a lot of people, but some people have said, well, you know, you should have gone to him. Well, I already had. A couple of times before that, nothing had helped. And, but obviously, what I had to say was not something that he appreciated. And so I hope the very best for Andy, but I am still very concerned about him. So, a one-line sentence question, you got about a 20-minute answer. But I just wanted it to be real clear, because I do care about Andy. All right, eating meat is not salvational, says Paul. Ellen White is stating that in the end times the saved won't eat meat. How can we explain the context to new believers? Folk, number one, Paul did state very clearly that health, what we eat and what we drink, affects how we run the race. Okay? So he may not have used the word salvational, but Paul surely said, well, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Let's take a look at it. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, starting with verse 24. Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that you may obtain. Well, folk, I don't know how many of you have ever heard about Michael Phelps, the famous gold medalist in swimming for the U.S. for a number of Olympic Games. Do you know what kind of a regiment that guy followed? Do you have any idea? You ought to go back and research it. To win a little medal that he could wrap around his neck or hang, you know, on an entertainment center in his house, do you know what that guy did for those? He had a regimented schedule that was insane. He trained. He trained. He ate a certain way. He drank a certain way. He omitted anything that would be a deterrent to him. He exercised. He would swim. Folks, that guy was so regimented, it was unbelievable. And he did that to obtain a little gold medal. And Paul's argument here in 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is, we're going for an eternal prize. Are we going to take seriously our health habits? I think the answer is pretty obvious. And Paul said it. Know ye not that they which run in a race won all, but one receives the prize? So run that you may obtain. And every man that striveth for the mastery is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a corruptible crown, but we an incorruptible. Folk, the obvious implication to Paul's words is a corruptible crown. These people trained and trained and trained to be in the optimum of health to gain the gold. We're going for an eternal prize. Are we going to be concerned about our health? Are we going to be concerned? You know, I've had people not only about eating meat, but I've had people through the years who, you know, I talk about eating between meals because Ellen White talks about eating between meals. She says, don't do it. She says, we shouldn't allow a morsel of food between our lips between our meal times. Sure it is. It's a terrible battle. Absolutely. Absolutely. Folk, you know, when I talk about that, I've had people say, come on, Bill, stop meddling. I want you to preach or teach, but don't meddle. Folk, that is a huge issue. The amount of sleep we get at night, that's a huge issue. If we're drinking enough water, you say, what difference? It makes a huge difference because it all impacts this thing right here. And this is where the great controversy is fought. Right here in your head. So if I'm eating flesh food, whether, you know, we can say, okay, Paul said it's not salvation. He may not have used the word, but 1 Corinthians chapter 9 is saying we better take seriously every aspect of our health. Because it will affect the crown that if we get the crown or not. I therefore so run, not as uncertainly. So fight I, not as one that beateth the air, but I keep under my body and bring it into subjection, lest that by any means, when I have preached to others, I myself should be a castaway. You know, I remember in the first conference church I taught in back in Pennsylvania, I worked with some very nice people. I still remember their names. Folk, they were so intemperate. They would work 16, 20 hours a day, come to school the next day. The kids would come into my class after they had been with one of the teachers, and they'd be chuckling, and I'd say, what are you guys laughing about? And they'd say, Mr. So-and-so fell asleep for 3/4 of our class. What is that? So, you know, we got to get our sleep. We've got to, these are all critical. And so, did Ellen White say that we wouldn't eat meat? Yeah, she said that. I think in a very general, in dealing with a principle here, Ellen White called us to look at all of our health habits. All of them. Our diet, our exercise, water, sleep, all of them. Because they're all critical. I always used to tell my students, I don't think I did it at the school where the guy fell asleep in the class, but I would always say, show me somebody who doesn't get enough sleep, and I will show you a person that is impatient. Because it's impossible to be patient if we're not getting our rest. It's impossible. Because if we're not rested and somebody hits us just the wrong way, what do? We snap. We snap at them. And that's because we haven't gotten enough sleep. So, we've got to take our health habits very, very seriously. And if we do, folk, well, what was the blessing for Daniel? Daniel and his friends. Let's read it. Daniel and his friends took health seriously. Daniel chapter 1. Verse 19 and 20. The king communed with them, and among them all was found none like unto Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Therefore stood they before the king. And in all matters of wisdom and understanding, that the king inquired of them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and astrologers that were in all his realm. Daniel and his friends took their health seriously. We need to do the same, and if we do, God will bless us. It's a guarantee. Guarantee. Where do you see the SDA church? Well, I see it exactly where Ellen White saw it when she looked down to this time in First Selected Messages, page 204 and 205. They've set up a new organization that's established on making money, having power, having position in the church, and that's what controls the church, is money. And in order to do that, they have to throw out what we believe as a people, and that's exactly what Ellen White said. And Ellen White then said that because the new organization was set up, and books of a new order were written, and the principles that we believed in for the last 50 years have been discarded, she said their foundation would be on the sand, and storm and tempest would sweep away the structure. And that's where we're heading, folks, like a freight train. Seventh-day Adventism is going to be swept away. It's going to be swept away. You say, boy, Bill, you're a nut. Well, you can take that up with Ellen White. You can take that up with Noah. You can take that up with everybody who has warned that apostasy always ends in the judgments of heaven. And this apostasy in Seventh-day Adventism, it will too end up in the judgments that will fall from heaven. Guarantee. When Jesus, while he was crucified on the cross, he said, "It is finished." What did he mean that was finished? Was it the earthly mission or the ceremonial law? Well, I think meant the ceremonial law. All the animal sacrifices pointing forward to Christ, they were done. It was finished. I believe Jesus, that came from a heart that was completely drained and wrenched by sin. And when he said, "It is finished," he said, "I'm done. I've done my job as sacrifice." So, and of course, when Jesus made that cry, we know in Matthew chapter 27, the Bible says the veil of the temple was rent in twain. Let's see if I can find that. Matthew chapter 27, verse 51, or 50. Jesus, when he had cried again with a loud voice, yielded up the ghost. And behold, the veil of the temple was rent in twain from the top to the bottom. The earth did quake, and the rocks rent. So I think the ripping of the veil and Christ's declaration of "it is finished" that he had won the victory. And the veil of the temple being rent showed that he had accomplished everything that was necessary as the Lamb of God. Dear Pastor, please tell us, when is the best time to leave the cities? Some people have talked about leaving the cities when the Sunday law comes, but won't that be too late? Folk, Ellen White talked about leaving the cities back in the 1890s. So where do you think we should be today? Does that mean that we start making some foolish decisions where we don't have the funds, or we don't have the people that could guide, or people that could be around us to help? No, you got to be wise about it. But folk, yeah, the best time is now. I want to balance that, because I know a lot of Seventh-day Adventists that have come through our little church in Florida, and they've said, well, you know, we love the work you're doing here, but we've got to go, we've got to go in the country. And I've always said to them, just make sure you don't forget that you've been called to share the truth with other people. Don't just go out in the country somewhere and don't help anybody. And take the city with you. Yeah. So I've always understood that Ellen White's counsel about leaving the cities has to do with being self-sufficient. Being able to grow your own food, be able to take care of yourself without staters. Is our problem in Adventism that we have forgotten Jesus is our only head and not the structure or anything or anyone else? This is the bottom line for all of us as we enter into the end times. Yeah, I would agree with that. Jesus isn't the head, he's the tail, he's the Achilles heel. Or as John in Revelation 3 says, he's standing outside the door and knocking. And that's the church's problem, and of course that has dovetailed into connecting with the UN and denying religious liberty to Adventists during COVID, and just on and on and on and on. And Christ, he's got to be the Lord of our lives too on an individual basis. Just like we talked about in the first meeting this morning. We've got to be connecting to Christ on a daily basis, because this is our probationary time. If we're not connecting with Christ, how are we going to deny what our flesh tells us to do? We don't have any power to deny it. The only way we can is through faith in the power of Christ. It's the only way, folks. So, yeah, do we need to be focused on Jesus? Absolutely we do. Tell a little more about more of your story about your dad finding out that SDAs worship the devil. Tell a little more of your story about your dad finding out that SDAs worship the devil, please. Well, my dad, he passed away about 31 years ago. He was a college professor. He was a self-made man. He, the only way he was able to go to college was through the GI Bill because he served in the military during World War II. He became a doctor of education. He took care of us. My mom always stayed home. I have 2 older brothers and a sister and a younger brother. All of them went to San Jose State University, and that was where Bill was supposed to go too. But when I started studying with the Seventh-day Adventists, I told my dad I was going to go to PUC and become a minister. And my dad told me I was crazy and that I'd lost my mind and that I was getting involved in a cult. And so he didn't know what to do. So he called his brother, who was a evangelical, fanatical evangelical, and my dad's brother, my uncle, lived in Joshua Tree, which is somewhere, I don't know, somewhere down in this area. East of here? Okay. So, and my dad never talked religion with his brother. Never. My dad wanted nothing to do with it. But my dad needed weaponry because he didn't know what to do with his boy, with me, because I was studying with a cultish group. You see, folk, as I mentioned this morning, back in the mid to later 70s, if you guys remember, there was a guy by the name of Sun Myung Moon. You guys remember him? Oh, yeah. And Sun Myung Moon was making disciples up and down the West Coast. So when I got involved with this group called Seventh-day Adventists, and I was studying the Bible with an Adventist minister, my parents were petrified. They said, oh no, our boy, we love him, and he's getting involved in this cult group, and he's going to, go off and live in a commune with some crazy man like Sun Myung Moon. They were scared to death. My folks were Methodist. Now, yeah. Now, to get a context, as a Methodist, for the first many years of my life, I never heard of John Wesley, the founder of Methodism. Methodism, by the time when I was growing up, was a joke. So, in fact, I still remember there was a little boy in our Sunday school class. His name was Happy McAlexander. And when the teacher would hand around a little offering plate for people to put money in, Happy would put in like 2 quarters, and then he'd take out all the cash. So, it was... So anyway, my dad, he called his brother, and he says, Cecil, he said, Bill's involved with these Adventist people. What can I do? Do you have any material I can use? So my Uncle Cecil sends my dad this book by Hoekema, and it was on the cults, and it included the Mormons, Jehovah's Witness, Christian Science, and Seventh-day Adventists. And in the part about Seventh-day Adventists, I was reading it. I said, I want to hear what the guy has to say. Well, Hoekema says that Seventh-day Adventists believe that the devil is their Savior. And the way he arrived at that was, he said, Seventh-day Adventists believe that the scapegoat of Leviticus chapter 16 makes atonement. Well, see, based on Webster's dictionary, that atonement is the sacrificial death of Christ on the cross, you can see exactly why Hoekema believed that. Because we do believe that the scapegoat was the devil. And Leviticus 16, verse 10, it says that. It says that the scapegoat makes atonement. Notice, Leviticus chapter 16, verse 10. The goat on which the lot fell to be the scapegoat, Azazel, or the adversary, shall be presented alive before the Lord to make an atonement with him and to let him go for a scapegoat into the wilderness. Did the scapegoat make an atonement? Of course he did. That's what the Bible says. Was the scapegoat sacrificed? No, the scapegoat wasn't sacrificed, but he did make atonement. So what does that mean? Well, it simply means this. There's more to atonement than sacrifice. Noah Webster should have stayed with words and not with religious concepts. Because atonement is not just the sacrifice of Christ. It's anything that takes care of the sin problem. And if we understand the biblical meaning of atonement, then it makes perfect sense that the scapegoat would make atonement. Did the devil have anything to do with the sin problem? Of course he did. He had everything to do with it. He was the originator of the sin problem. So doesn't it logically conclude then that he's going to have a part in taking care of the sin problem? Of course it does. But see, Hoekema, in his book, made it seem like we were replacing Christ as our sacrifice and making the devil our sacrifice. Hoekema would say that we were making the devil our God. That's what he was saying. And so as my dad's reading that, he's going, my son's lost his mind. You know? And that's why when I told him, Dad, I'm going to PUC to be an Adventist minister, he said, you've been brainwashed. Yeah, it was tough. It was tough. You know, it's really amazing because that just about killed me when my dad said that. Because my dad was it. My parents, I mean, I'd been taught, you love your folks, you respect them, you honor them. And I did, and I loved them. I loved my parents. And I always wanted to please them, always. And when I heard my dad say, Bill, you've been brainwashed, and basically he was saying, you're crazy. That deeply hurt. And then to go on to PUC. Go on to PUC. After my family have told me I'm a basket case for becoming a Seventh-day Adventist Christian and wanting to become an Adventist pastor, and I get to PUC and I'm being told that Ellen White didn't know what she was talking about. Welcome to the great controversy. But I'll tell you, folk, after seeing my immediate family seeing things the way they did, when I went to PUC and I heard Desmond Ford say, you know, everything was done at the cross, there's nothing that Christ can do to help you to overcome. Well, I could listen to that and say, you know, buddy, you're a liar. Because I've seen I've seen what Jesus has done in my own heart. You know, I was into the rock music of the 60s. And my mind, I couldn't control my mind when I'd be sitting in classes and teachers would be up there talking, and I'd be singing a Beatles song. I would, because it controlled my mind. That's what that music does. It hypnotizes, and it has a hypnotic grab to your mind. It did to mine. And but Jesus took that away from me. It's like what Eddie was saying this morning, where we need to discipline our mind. And, you know, I'd walk into the PUC market, and at the PUC market, they'd have a radio going in the market, and it'd be a, you know, what they'd call soft rock, but it was still a Beatles song. And I knew exactly what it was. So as I'm walking into the PUC college market, I'm saying, Lord Jesus, I know you have the power to deliver me from this garbage music that's being played at the PUC college market. So Desmond Ford's salvation in sin, I knew that was a lie, because I had already seen what Jesus could do in my life. So I wasn't about to have somebody tell me that there were problems with Ellen White's writings. Is Ted Wilson's idol only money, or is the Pope another idol? I believe that Ted Wilson imbibed a Jesuit principle, and that simply was, I'm in this to make money and to become, you know, a great man and to become a president in the denomination. Is the Pope his idol? I think the principles that led a man like Francis or this new Pope or the previous popes before them, the principle that applies right across the board in both religions is they do exactly as their leaders tell them to do. Exactly. They never protest it. They become, as the Jesuit oath says, they become a cadaver, where they obey if the priest or the leader says, the ceiling here is a dark orange, it's got to be dark orange. And that's cadaver obedience. And I believe that's what Ted Wilson imbibed, just like the papists do. I don't think there's any difference. How do you believe the Sunday law will be implemented? It can't be as easy as the president signing it into law because of our Constitution. I believe there must be a worldwide crisis, one that would bring such a law. I agree with you. There will be crisis. How do I believe it will happen? I think Ellen White in Great Controversy 589 and 590 has made it clear how it will happen. She talks about the devil having access to the laboratories of nature and creating all kinds of natural disasters. And then he will come forth and say, all these disasters are being caused by those who are desecrating the Sunday Sabbath. So I believe it will be through climate that will bring it about. It can't be as easy as the president signing into law because of our Constitution. I would agree with you. I don't believe God's going to allow a president who is, what do we call those things? When the president signs something in executive order. I don't believe the Sunday law is going to come in by executive order. I believe God will allow it to be agitated, to try to awaken as many people as he can. And they do. Yes, ma'am. The people will call for it. Are we living in the time of NOS? I don't want to call out anybody, but whoever said that, what is NOS? Well, I'll interpret it that way, Eddie. Folk, I firmly believe that, yeah, we are living in the time of when a national Sunday law could occur. There's no question about it. I will say this. For a lot of Seventh-day Adventists that I've met through the years, the thought of a national Sunday law scares them. But I think we need to look at a national Sunday law in a very healthy way, and the healthy way is to say this: regardless of what's going on around us, we've got to focus on the things that we can control. And the three things we can control is our spiritual life, our physical health, and our witnessing. Those are the three things we need to focus on. Just like during COVID, the world was completely out of control. Fauci and his minions were doing whatever they wanted, and we had no control. So when you don't have control, you start doing some crazy things. So you take what you can control and you focus on that. So you focus on having a good devotion time. You focus on making your body as fit and healthy as you can. And you focus on witnessing opportunities to share the truth with other people. Those three things we can control. And be a blessing to ourselves and to those around us. How can I go around when he dislikes the three angels? How can I go around my pastor when he dislikes the three angels and the Sabbath to inmates? If I'm understanding this question right, this pastor doesn't like the three angels' messages and doesn't like the Sabbath and doesn't like me proclaiming it to the inmates. I wouldn't go when the pastor goes. I wouldn't. Why would you? It's counterproductive. I'd go when the pastor wasn't there. If he's going on, I'd say, Pastor, when are you going to the prison? I'm going on Tuesday. Well, then you go on Wednesday. What good would it do for you to get up and say, the three angels' messages are in Revelation 14, and they're the last gospel warning to the world? And the pastor raises his hand and says, oh, no, that's not right. What good is being done? Well, does anybody else have a question from the audience? And then we'll stop.
Pastor, I have a question. Revelation 12, Revelation 12, verse 3. It says, and another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great fire red dragon, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 diadems or crowns on his heads. In this verse, it says that there's crowns on the heads. And if you jump to chapter 13, verse 1, it says, then stood on the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rising up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his horns 10 crowns. So now the crowns are on the head on chapter 12, and the crowns are on the horns on chapter 13. What does that mean?
I don't know. Yeah. I know that the great red dragon of Revelation 12, verse 3, is, in its first meaning, is the devil. In the second meaning there, it's pagan Rome. In Revelation 13, the beast that comes out of the sea is the papacy. The heads, the horns, the crowns, I've shied away from that. Yeah. You know, there's some things that, well, like I think it's the seven thunders in Revelation 11. Let's see, where is it? Okay, thank you. Revelation 10:4. It says, "And when the seven thunders had uttered their voices, I was about to write, I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Seal up those things which the seven thunders have uttered, and write them not." With some things, as I feel with the horns, the heads, the crowns, the thunders, it becomes speculation. And speculation, for me, doesn't help me. And if I'm speculating about something and I can't back it up conclusively, I'm just not going to touch it. So, yes, Daniel.
I just wanted you not to feel like the lone stranger when it came to your father, thinking you had lost your mind when you joined the SDA church. About 45 years ago, when my brother joined, my dad came to me and said exactly the same thing. He goes, "Your brother's been brainwashed." He goes, they're a cult.
You bet.
I just wanted you to know that he was in the same boat as you.
Yeah, I really related it. Yeah, he goes, yeah, they got it when it was weak.
Yeah, it hurts. It hurts.
You know, the thing of it, I really had a lot of love for you, thinking, you know, our dad he was demon possessed a lot of times, you know. But if he'd have been loving to us and took care of us, it would have been a lot harder. But
Sure.
I was of the attitude, I found something that is so precious that I don't care if anybody follows me. I'm going with Jesus. Amen.
Absolutely. Well, you know, Dave, in that time frame, my folks, in their concern, my sister took me to a deprogrammer one night. Yeah, took me to a deprogrammer. And he was the top deprogrammer in Santa Clara Valley. And I've never forgotten his name. His name was Eric Greasehopper. The guy was very intelligent. He knew more about Seventh-day Adventism than I did, because I'd been studying with the Seventh-day Adventists for 4 months, you know, and this guy, I mean, he knew about Miller and Ellen White and Joseph Bates, and I mean, he knew a lot. And so I listened to him. It was about a 4-hour meeting that night. When he got done, I said, "Mr. Greasehopper," I said, you know a whole lot more than I do. And I appreciate what you've shared. But I said, what I have learned from the Seventh-day Adventists so far, I can see it in the Bible or in history. And I said, "Mr. Greasehopper, as long as what they teach me, I can see it in the Bible and or in history, I said, you can stand on your head and turn green. You're not going to change my mind. You see? And I'm still here, Dave.
You know, that was me too. And I don't care what everybody else says. It's in history. It's in the Bible. You can't disprove it.
That's right.
How did they deprogram you? Did they use drugs or?
Daniel, all he did was, like I said, it was kind of like he just kept pouring it on. You know, just pouring it on. It was a 4-hour meeting. 4 hours that one night, I remember.
Where are you out?
Yes, ma'am.
Have you ever given your testimony how you got introduced to Adventism and how you became an Adventist? And before you answer that, I wanted to make one comment when we were talking about meat. We had a speaker here, and he gave a comment. He said, you know, diet won't get you into heaven, but diet could keep you out of heaven. What do you think about that?
It's a very good point. It's a very good point. Again, the principle in 1 Corinthians 9 is we're going for a heavenly crown. If we were going for a gold medal, I mean, when I was growing up, I may have told you guys this, today, if you were to turn on the sports station in Chicago, Illinois, you would hear my older brother's voice. He's been the professional broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs for about 25 years. Sports ran in our blood and our family. I won growing up like, I don't know, 20, 25 trophies for most valuable player or first team all-league or this or that or this or that. And what did I do to earn all those trophies? Well, I would run many miles a day. I would lift weights. I would, try to eat the best I knew how, even though I was eating flesh food and everything else under the sun. But I tried to be as healthy as I could. And I did that for those trophies, and today all they do is collect dust. That's all they do is collect dust. And Paul, in 1 Corinthians 9, he's saying, hey, they do it for a corruptible crown. We're doing it for an incorruptible. So am I going to be serious about how I treat my body? I became a Seventh-day Adventist, raised a Methodist, thought it was a joke. My mom was 5'2", weighed about 100 pounds, and every Sunday she had a war with me and my 2 older brothers because she wanted us to wear dark socks. And we were all athletes. We didn't wear dark socks. We wore white socks. And so our mom would come in, boys, do you have your your black socks on? No, Mom, we're wearing our white socks. Get your dark socks on. Well, it was a joke. It was a joke. So all through high school, of course, I got in. I was an athlete. Got into rock music, got into immorality, just living for myself. And but one of my older brothers, who has passed away, he got involved in drugs, and he lost his mind, literally. He lost his mind. And he came to our home and he was threatening my parents. Tried to kill my mother. Threatened to kill my dad. I was scared to death of him and I wanted to kill him. I really did. He was a little bit older than I was, but seeing my parents hurting. I wanted to hurt whoever was hurting them. And so at that time in my life, I was about a senior in high school. And there were some Baptists, friends of ours, who were going up to a Baptist summer camp in Canada for the summer. They came from Texas, and they came the southern route, and they came up through San Jose where we were living, and they stopped at our home. And those young women, they were about 25 or so, 25 years of age. They had something in their life, and I had to have it. I didn't know what it was. There was a peace, there was a joy. I didn't know what it was, but I had to have it because I was miserable. I was miserable. Yeah, you know, my senior class, they gave out 12 awards to my class. There was like 500 of us in the class. They called it the senior mosts. You know, like most likely to succeed, most beautiful person, most this, most that, most, all the senior mosts. There were 12 of them. I got 4 of them in a class of 500 students. And one of my dear friends, he said that thing was rigged. You must have known somebody on that committee. So we had a good laugh out of that. But in spite of all that, I was miserable. I was miserable inside. I had no peace. I had no joy. And I was a slave to sin. So when those girls came through, there was something they had. So as they got ready to leave, I said to them, I said, I'll see you in a couple weeks. They laughed. Well, about 3 weeks later, I boarded a plane to British Columbia. I had to know what they had. And I wasn't going to let anything stop me. So I got up there. That was on a Friday. 2 days later, of course, we were in church on that Sunday. And, you know, I thought this is, I don't like this. You know, my church experience had been a joke. Well, when we got out to the car, one of the young women, she was sitting in the front seat, and she turned around and she said, I can't believe that Jesus Christ died for me. And that just hit me. I'd never heard that in my life. Never heard it in my life. And all of a sudden, from that young woman saying that, I prayed for probably the first time in my life. And I said, Jesus, this young lady says that you died for me, that you loved me. And I said, I don't believe that. I don't believe that. But I said, I'm willing to try you out because I hate my brother because of what he's doing in my family. And I said, help me to love him. Change my heart so I can love him, so I can be at peace around him, so that I'm not afraid of him. When I got back to San Jose, I continued to pray those prayers. One night I went to pick up my brother down at a cannery in San Jose. When he got into the car, I picked him up. He got in the car. He was so paranoid, he pulled out a knife. It was about this long. And he stuck it within about 6 inches of my face. And he said, this is for anybody that crosses me. Before I went to Canada, if my brother would have done that, I would have said, "Get out of my car." Because I would have been scared to death. But this time, with a peace that I could never have manufactured, I looked at my brother and I said, "John, just put the knife away. Nobody's going to hurt you." And he did. I saw that Jesus was real because he changed my heart towards my brother. I loved my brother, and I would have done anything for him, even though he was tearing our home apart. So I became a Christian. I thought the Bible, and I'm being honest, I thought the Bible was a fairy tale. But I knew Jesus was real. I knew he was. So one day I opened the Bible and I was flipping through and I came to the book of Daniel. And I started reading about leopards with wings and bears with ribs in their mouths, and I closed the book in disgust. I said, "This is a joke. A book about animals that look weird and, have a little horn and 10 horns." And I said, this is ridiculous. And I closed the book. Well, at that time, I was going to a Presbyterian Bible study, and my sister needed help with her son, her newborn son. So she asked me if I would babysit him on a particular day. And I said, "Yeah, I can, but I'd miss my Bible study." But I said, "For you, I'll do it." So I started watching my little nephew, which I was thrilled to. Well, at that time, I met a woman who worked at the junior college in San Jose, California, where I was going to college. She was a librarian. She worked in periodical mailing. And one day I'm standing there, or actually I saw her outside one day. She was having her lunch, and she asked me how I was doing. And I said, "Well, I'm kind of disappointed because I have to forego going to this Bible study. I'd really love to study the Bible, but I don't know who would do that." She looked at me and she said, "My pastor would love to study the Bible with you." I said, "He would? He'd take the time to study with me?" She said, "Yeah, no problem." So she said, "When do you want to do it?" So we set up a time. He came out. We got to know each other. And at the end of the first meeting, he said, "Bill, what would you like to study?" And I said, "Well, I love history because I was a history major. I wanted to be a history teacher." So he said, "Great." Well, I said, "I'd love to study the history of the Bible." So he said, "Good. We'll do that next week." So the next week, there's a chalkboard in this room at West Valley Junior College in Saratoga, California. There's a chalkboard. He writes a line right across the board. And he says, "Now Adam lived about 4,000 BC. And then Noah lived around 2,400 BC. And he goes down and he tells me Abraham about 2,000. David lived around 1,000 BC. And then he said, "Now, let's open the Bible to Daniel chapter 2. And in my mind, I thought, that's that crazy book with all those animals. And I thought to myself, this Bible study's not going to last very long because I'm not going to listen to a book about these crazy animals. So he goes through the metal man, Babylon. And as he goes down through it, I'm going, I'm learning that in my history class. And I look at him and I said, when did Daniel live? He said he lived during the days of Nebuchadnezzar in the early 6th century BC and in the upper 500s BC. So I said he saw that before it happened. He said, yeah, he did. I was stunned. He was a Seventh-day Adventist. The woman that in periodical mailing, she was a Seventh-day Adventist. The pastor was a Seventh-day Adventist, and we went right through Daniel. We went through Revelation. We didn't study about the horns or the heads. It was beautiful. Still is beautiful. And he baptized me October 22, 1977. Yeah. October 22. No, it wasn't, ma'am. No, it was the greatest joy of my life to become a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. Yes, it did. Have there been trials? Well, we all live in the same world. Of course, there's been trials, disappointments, heartaches, sadnesses. But through it all, Jesus has always said, I'm with you always. I'll never leave you or forsake you. And so, it's great peace, great joy in that. When I was baptized, 1977. So 48 years ago. Long time. Let's see, in 77, I was 20 years old. Yeah. Just a baby. You're well, of course. Anybody else? Or are we done? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I have a girlfriend from childhood. We were both born in Madison College, Tennessee, and grew up there. And she's sad that I'm coming to an independent church. She says, we're supposed to, Ellen White says this and that, and the sifting, they'll fall out, and you'll. So I don't know how to counter that. So Ellen White, I think, did say things like that.
Say things like what, ma'am?
The people, when there's a sifting, they will go out of the church, and so she is loyal to the church, and the tithe should go to the Seventh-day Adventist organization. Anyway, I don't know how to. I just stay silent about it.
Ma'am, what I've understood, when you, like for example, when you read the quote, the church may appear as about to fall, but it doesn't fall while the sinners in Zion are sifted out. In that very same paragraph, Ellen White describes the church. It's not a building. It's not a location. It's an experience. The church of God are living, faithful souls. That's the church. In that statement where she talks about the church that will not fall, she says, those who are standing for the truth and overcoming by the blood of the Lamb, they will stand. So, ma'am, your friend, unfortunately, has imbibed the idea that the church is a building and it's a location and an organization. And it's not. Ellen White repeatedly through her writings makes that so clear, that the church is where 2 or 3 are gathered in her name, walking with him. That's God's church. So, but see, the denomination has jumped on those statements and they say, see, she's talking about a physical building. She's not. She's not. Upward look, page 315. There's another one in Acts of the Apostles, page 11, I believe, where it says, throughout history, faithful souls have constituted the church of God on earth. Upward look, page 315.
315.
Acts of the Apostles, page 11.
I have a question. What
Yes,
is your
ma'am.
take on people who state that we need to bring the tithes to the house of the Lord, but yet the churches, some of the conference churches are not doing what they need to be doing with the money the people provide? So this person stated to me earlier, no matter what, you need to bring the tithe to the house of the Lord. And the church will not follow. I said, yes, but if they're not doing what they need to be doing, why are you going to be supporting? You're going to be just as guilty for what they're doing with your money because you're following what Ellen G. White says, because she says, she quoted that. Anyways. So that was my answer to her.
Ma'am, I'll tell you, in 1904, there were a group of self-supporting missionaries, independent Adventists. They were working in the South, okay, doing missionary work, trying to help the former slaves to hear the gospel and the 3 angels' messages. Ellen White's son, I think it was, let's see, that was her second son, Edson. Edson had built a ship and went down the Mississippi, and he was throwing leaflets of truth all up and down the Mississippi. Well, because the denomination took the view that your friend is describing, you have to put your money in the till, or God won't approve. See, the church did not support Edson White and the people who were doing missionary work in the South. So Ellen White told them, she said, look, you go directly to the Adventist people and you ask them for money because you are worthy of tithes and offerings. Okay? These missionaries went to Colorado and they told people in the Colorado churches, they said, you know, this is the work we're doing, and if you could help us, that would be great. Well, the Colorado people, Adventists, started giving them tithes and offerings, just like Ellen White told them to do. These missionaries go back to the South, and they start, with that money, they get books and they get other materials, and they're spreading them all over the South. When the Colorado Conference president, a man by the name of Watson, he found out what those missionaries had done, he wrote them a nasty letter and he said, that money belongs to me. Those people are my people and their money is my money and you need to give it back. And he said to them, I'm the storehouse. The Adventist church is the storehouse. This is where that money belongs. Ellen White wrote Elder Watson a letter. And she said, Brother Watson. Now she said it very kindly, ma'am, but she said, you need to keep your mouth shut. Because those people are worthy of that money. They are doing a great work. And the monies that were given to them, that money was put where it belonged. Ma'am, when your friend says that it has to go into the temple or the storehouse, in Ellen White's mind, the storehouse was where the truth of God was being presented. That was her storehouse. Ellen White, for the last 60 years of her life, she didn't put her money into the conference. She put it to support needy ministers, primarily in the South, that were not getting paid by the denomination. That's what Ellen White did. You're welcome.
An appeal was made at the GC to for assistance for Edson White's ministry, the group's ministry in the South at Vicksburg, and they filibustered and blabbed about it, but they did nothing.
That's right.
Sort of like what happened at the GC a few weeks ago, a couple of weeks, similar. You know, people get up and talk, but the opposers, they know how to filibuster and squelch it with just talk.
Right.
So it, you know, important issues can come to nothing with that filibuster trick, and they did that at the GC, you know, 120 years ago, whenever it was.
Absolutely. You know, if you go back, there's a book, Ellen White, she gave a talk in 1891, and it's found in a book called The Southern Work. And in that message that she gave, she literally blasted the denomination, because she said, the Civil War ended 25 years ago, and you have done nothing to help the former slaves of the South. She ripped into Daniels and Olson and Butler because they had neglected the South. And Edson White read that article, that letter that she had written. He read it about 3 years after that. Edson White was so convinced that he had to do something, he built a boat called the Morning Star, sailed it down the Mississippi, and started doing work in the South. And the denomination, Ellen White, that part's a little bit hazy. I know Ellen White rebuked the brethren because there was a certain amount of money that was allocated to Edson White and the workers in the South, and the brethren withheld it. He didn't get it. So, sure. Yeah, but Ellen White, she ripped into the denomination for that. And that was why, for the last many decades of her life, she bypassed the denomination. She gave her money, her tithes and her offerings, directly to workers in the South, white pastors and black pastors, because they were not being supported by the denomination. And if anybody tried to pull the idea on Ellen White, well, you're not putting the money in the storehouse, they never said that to her, because Ellen White knew full well what the storehouse was, and they wouldn't dare to try to pull that one over on her. Wouldn't dare.
Yes, I was brainwashed with who to give the money to and the tithes and offering to for a long time, until independent ministries really defined what the storehouse is, because it didn't make any sense. You're going to an independent church and giving your money to the conference. So yeah, I was brainwashed for a long time, and then until I read Ellen White's messages and what happened with her son Epson and Madison and all that stuff.
Yes,
and the
ma'am.
thing is, the church under the conference, they won't tell you all those things, but they're like, oh, we're the storehouse, we're the storehouse. So I was brainwashed for a long time, but now I see the light.
Amen.
And so, yeah, because I remember too, I saw a video with when Mark Finley was coming out of the last GC, and someone asked him, so did John the Baptist had an independent ministry? He said yes, both independent and under the conference, and that's false.
Ma'am, this comes right back to what we were talking about in the second meeting this morning. The one thing the denomination prizes above all else, it's the money. It's the money. And they have butchered, they have misapplied, they have withheld information from the Seventh-day Adventist people on what the storehouse really is. Because, like the president of the Colorado Conference, G.F. Watson, in the early 1900s, in his mind, every penny of tithe and offering in the Colorado Conference was his. It was his money. So, again, these guys, they think they're God. They think they're God, and they're going to lie to you. They're going to bamboozle you. They're going to do anything they can to get your money. That's what they're going to do. So,
I just have a comment.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't remember where, by one of her writings, Sanji White writings, I read that some of our tithe money could be used for doing missionary work and literature to do the work. So I know it's in one of her writings. I came across it, I can't remember where. And like Shelley, me, for a couple of years while I came here as a visitor, I was very, where I should give my tithes, because I've been coming here for several years and I was tithing somewhere else in a conference church. And after hearing all these things that, what they really were doing and not doing, I said, no, the Lord kind of convicted me, the Holy Spirit, I prayed about it. So my tithes go here now. So,
wonderful. Wonderful.
Well, about 35 years ago, I was a deacon in the Roseville Church, and I remember we were collecting offerings. And I forget what happened. There was some kind of a scandal going on. And I remember talking to one of the other deacons. I said, well, God tells me to give my tithe, and what they do with it, that's up to them. And I was totally wrong, of course. And I just thank God that in his mercy he helped me to see that, no, I am responsible, because I'm responsible to know who needs that money that's giving the message that's connected with God. And once I saw it, I didn't have any problems. I just looked at it, it's between me and God that I have to be responsible to know who's preaching the message, because it started to become obvious that there were some real problems.
Dave, when something is so illogical that doesn't amount to an ounce of sense is spoken, there's an agenda. There's an agenda. And to say that it doesn't make any difference, oh my, you're spoiling me. Dave, how can somebody say that? That it doesn't matter what they're spending it on. They can invest it in pornography, they can invest it in rifles, they can invest it in lawsuits against faithful Adventists. I mean, yeah. And say, you just put your money in. Dave, the beauty of the biblical principle, come now, let us reason together, saith the Lord.
I thank God, though. I found...
Pastor Cortez, that's for you.
Oh, I was waiting for it.
Come on.
I just wanted to finish with, I started tithing to a an outfit that you were involved with, and I feel sorry for what happened to Brother John. But and I remember that they got broken into, and the law enforcement there in Florida said this was somebody like in the CIA that came through. They disabled the locks and everything else, and all they wanted to know was who was giving them money. That's what they wanted to know. So things are a lot different than most people think. And you know, I was coming out of being very naive. You know, I never had any background, you know, growing up with anything to do with the Bible. I wasn't an atheist, but I was probably like an agnostic. I just didn't know. But I was open-minded later on once, you know, God arranged certain things to wake me up.
Amen. Amen, Dave.
I just wanted to go back to Andy Roman. I'm a little confused. It sounds like you're saying to me that he has 1 foot in the conference and 1 foot in his independent ministry, or how would you explain that?
I think we should leave that alone.
We'll ask
Pastor.
Andy. Andy's coming.
How do you define
first of
Mrs.
November.
White's role?
What's that?
How do you define Mrs. White's role as far as these days theology is concerned?
I'm sorry, sir, say that again?
How do you define Mrs. White's role as far as these days theology is concerned? Did she have any part in defining what the truth or what the teachings of the Seventh-day Adventist Church should be? Because some people, I think, or some leaders think that Mrs. White's role was did not really define what truth is, but it's kind of like counseling, exhortation, something like that. But determining what really is the theology of the Seventh-day Adventists is, she did not have the part or role. What do you say?
My understanding, sir, is that when the early Adventists studied the Bible and they were confused as to how certain verses came together, like on the sanctuary or other subjects, that Ellen White was then taken off in vision, and she was shown how all those verses came together, so that the pioneers, all of their teachings and all our beliefs are based clearly in the Word of God. And now, and after that time, after all the doctrines were established, Ellen White's writings simply show us what is already in Scripture. Kind of like a telescope. A telescope doesn't add any stars in the sky. It just simply shows us the stars that are already there. Absolutely, ma'am. Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Whatever. Go ahead, Pastor Cortez.